Welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today the Poison Pen is honored to have with us debut author Jenny Erlingsson, whose new book, Her Part to Play, will soon be available in bookstores and libraries near you. Before we begin, I want to let those tuning in know the Poison Pen does have copies of Her Part to Play on order, and we would be happy to hold one for you at the bookstore or put one in the mail. Just give us a call or go online to the Poison Pen Bookstore. Now I'd like to welcome Jenny.
Thank you so much, John. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak with you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. My first question to authors as a reader is I'm always fascinated by their life before they decided to write a book. And you have a fascinating backstory. What can you tell us about Jenny before you wrote Her Part to Play?
Oh, it's like my origin story, huh?
Yes.
But before I wrote, and I guess still am, but I am a speaker and an author, and all of that kind of came a little bit organically because I went to school for social work actually, but after college did not end up working in a social work agency, ended up working full time at a church, which I was very thankful for my social work background to be in the church. But I have always written, even from childhood. I wrote stories about my Barbies and loved kind of reading a ton of books. Book fairs at school were my favorite,
Yeah.
times of the year at school. And so that still lingered even throughout even my education. I specialized, or my concentration was in policy plan administration, focusing on grant writing. So writing was always just a part of the curriculum and messages and Bible studies and all of that. But yeah, my husband is Icelandic. And about, wow, well, 8 years ago now, he really felt the pull to move back to his home country to serve there. And I wasn't having it. But then we did move 6 years ago. So I guess I gave in, right? Thanks to God and so much else, and probably movies, because let me tell you, like in that season, the amount of movies that were filmed
Yeah.
in Iceland, I was like, what's going on? This is too, like, Iceland's too small for all y'all to have filmed, here. So all of that. So we moved about 6 years ago. And so yeah, we serve in the country and work in different areas, but that's God kind of opened up the door, and I was able to work on this novel and just fiction in general. But then there was an open door for this novel, and so I stepped into it. And so I'm so grateful to be able to do that from here.
Yeah. You had written nonfiction before, but what made you
Hmm.
decide I want to write a novel? Was it something in
Yeah.
particular, or what was the process like getting Her Part to Play into print?
Yeah, out there. I think it's just that deep desire that I'd kind of buried after a while, or thought that maybe my time had passed for, or almost that it wasn't serious enough for the roles that I had. But I still always wrote on the side, and I tell people that writing is like, or fiction is like my first love in writing. So I've written poetry and even all the other things that I mentioned before, but loved writing stories and of course reading. On this end, after we moved, my youngest was an infant, and I just really began to just think about it and pray about it, and just really had that desire to write, but didn't really know if I had the permission to write within those roles. And so, through a lot of different circumstances, encouragement from different people. So I talk about my book being called Her Part to Play, but people play their own parts in encouraging me. And when I saw that a new agency had joined, a new agent, excuse me, had joined an agency that I'd been following, I thought this is a good opportunity. So I sent her a proposal initially, and she was like, "This is not marketable enough, but I see that you do nonfiction. Let's try that." Sent her two different proposals over that year. And because of, different platform issues and all of that, and that comes into play with nonfiction, that didn't turn out. And so she was like, if you would like, you can maybe, if you want to look at another agent or something else. And I said, I'm either lazy or loyal. And so I'm just going to try to still, query you over and over again, basically, and we'll see what happens. And I'm just going to trust. And literally 2 days later, she said, you know what? I was praying about it, and let's try fiction again. And so I did. And I wrote the first draft of this novel, of Her Part to Play, in about 6 weeks. And so she signed me on to the agency. And then probably about, I think about 6 or 7 months later, yeah, I found out that Ravel wanted to publish this book. So it was really amazing, the quickness after years and years and years of that dream, but to see how it all kind of unfolded rather quickly in the publishing world, because things take
Yes.
so things take
I'm
time.
You
They
had
do.
put the time in, but the actual process was quickly to get it into print.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
What can you tell us about her part to play for readers?
Yes, her part to play is a contemporary romance, but I love that some reviewers have called it a complex contemporary romance, or even maybe veers a little bit into women's fiction. But it's about a makeup artist who works in Hollywood, but ends up moving back to her Alabama hometown because her mom is sick and her mom ends up passing away. But in the meantime, she finds out that she has lost her job because of the actions of an actor there. And 3 years later, there's a movie filming in her Alabama hometown. She decides to go and work that to earn money to raise money because she's kind of covering and taking care of this community center that her parents started. And lo and behold, instead of just doing the backgrounds makeup, she's doing the makeup of this artist who unintentionally got her fired, this actor. And so the sparks are flying for sure because she's not a fan and he is not really happy to be there, but he is also recovering from some addictions from a breakup. But the sparks don't are not so negative after a while, but it definitely takes them a while, especially her, to warm up to him and to his efforts to seemingly plant himself into her community. So then things unfold from there with the town and her family and friends, and so it's a lot of fun to explore what can happen between people from totally different cultures and backgrounds and roles in the industry.
Let's talk a little bit about the setting because most of the book is in Hope Springs.
Hmm.
Um, did you kind of borrow on your own experiences living in Alabama when it came time to create Hope Springs?
I definitely did. I'm like, and I hope my fellow North Alabama people will not be too upset because there are some beautiful parts of. I'm from Huntsville, which is in North Alabama, and that I pulled from there some inspiration from there, also inspiration from a suburb of Huntsville, which is called Madison, that I lived in and went to school in. So I pulled elements from there to create this fictional town. And I do have Huntsville in the book, and also a big Huntsville's called the Rocket City. And so a big part of that is because of the Space and Rocket Center, NASA Space and Rocket Center and Space Camp that's there. So they do make a cameo. But Hope Springs is a fictional small town off of Huntsville. But yeah, I did definitely pulled in some inspiration for that, which was a lot of fun. And it was great too, being overseas as well to kind of um, deal with the homesickness by writing about the area that I love.
Both of your characters, you bring a bit of other cultures into the story. In the
Mhm.
case of John, it's his Italian American family, and is it Adani?
Yeah, Adene. Yeah.
Adani, her
Hmm.
own family's origins in Nigeria. Can you talk a
Hmm.
little bit about that and why it was important to show those aspects of their character?
Yeah, I'm a really big believer in, and of course, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, even more so nowadays. But there's a level where growing up, that was just the norm for me. So it wasn't something, and there are situations that happened for sure, and things that were not right or that you would want to change, or the times where, I'm maybe the only person of color, a Black person, African person in a certain setting. But I'm, from the era of, from the Cosby shows to the Fresh Prince to TGIF and all that, where there was so much in even television, and even the churches that I grew up in, the communities that I was in Knoxville, Tennessee. My dad was getting his PhD, and so we lived in the graduate student housing, and we had not only our family and other Nigerian families, but there were Kenyan families, Filipino families, like there were just people from just all different places because they were studying as well. And so that just the cultural layers has always been so fun. My friendships growing up have just been so multicultural. So I wanted to weave that into the story because I think we forget as we look around us, it's not just these certain like factions that we place people in, but people come with, they may look, on the surface like white American, but they have layers to them based on culture, even based on where you live in the States. I see that even more being overseas, how different pockets and states are across the United States. And then, of course, my culture, yes, I'm a, face value a Black American woman, but I'm my parents were immigrants, And so there's things that I eat, like I love Southern food, so I'm gonna mix it in with some West African food as well. And now I've learned how to make Icelandic food. And so that's important now, even for my kids, because they are multicultural, multi-layered, to see that represented in what they take in and what they read, that this is not an exception. It just is. It's just the world that we live in. And so I really wanted to be intentional about it, but not to kind of push or force something, to just show the reality of what I've grown up with and what other people have grown up with as well.
You do it really well in the story. It comes across
Thank you.
organically. Um, you there's a lot of themes that you explore in the book. One of
Hmm.
the ones that I found was, and I could be wrong, correct me if I am, but both your protagonists are dealing with issues in the past that they won't let go of. It's about
Yeah.
letting go of your past and accepting a future that may be there for you.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's something that's really been I've seen unfold for me, even over here. But there's a verse in the Bible that says in Isaiah 43:19 that God's doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? He's making a way in the wilderness, streams in the desert. And so that new thing, almost like you keep looking backwards, characters, you're looking back, you're holding on to offense, maybe you're holding on to unforgiveness, you're holding on to maybe mistakes and to shame. And there's this new thing that's like jumping out in front of you that's kind of maybe in an unexpected place because, John's in this small town. Adane is like not trying to be back in the same scenario that got her fired. So there's triggers there. But it's like if you'll just let go of that and fix your gaze forward, you'll see something right in front of you, that is new, that is something that maybe meets your heart desire. And so that definitely is a huge part of the book. And because I tell other people the new thing may be the new opportunity, a new season, but it may just be right what's right in front of you. But you got so much of that filter, over your eyes because of the past. And so I'm glad that that comes through because I want people to look at their own lives and say, okay, what is it? What's there for? Like my husband, like I was not trying to look at him at all when we first started talking. I was like, I don't know about this guy and all of that. And I was actually quite rude to him initially. And it wasn't until 3 years later where I saw with different eyes what had been right in front of me in this town of mine, this man that would eventually become my husband. And so I think it's really vital for us to, you know, learn from the past, but keep our eyes forward.
One of the other things I identified with in your character, Adene, was her reluctance to accept help from other people. She's carrying a
Hmm.
lot and she
Hmm.
thinks she has to do everything. She can't, if she lets go, it's somehow going to jeopardize
Yeah.
her work there. And you really show how actually it's better if she lets other people give her what they want to do, what they want to.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think for sure that is something that, especially if you're maybe quite capable or skilled in certain areas, but of course, it's our different personalities, but it definitely is a measure of pride where we think that only we can get it done. And it's not even always getting it done the right way. It's just only we can get it done. And I know I've even struggled with, well, I don't want to inconvenience someone else. I don't
Mhm.
want to put that on them. So I can hold it on me, and then you recognize when you go to sleep, like your shoulders are tight, right? You're stressed out, and all these different things. And so, yeah, I think for her, trying to, especially forgetting who she is and trying to carry on her parents' legacy and trying to do all these things to be who her mom was, maybe in the community, but that's not necessarily what was expected of her. But she just took that on, and yeah. So I think it's just really beautiful to see how it unfolds for sure in the book, and it's a good reminder for me for sure, and I think for all of us that we can lean on others, and we're intended to lean on other people as well.
A lot of readers, myself included, sometimes think that writers can just make things up when it comes to books. But there has to be some grounding in reality. And I know often fiction writers do research. I'm interested why you chose to incorporate Hollywood, the movie making business, into your
Mhm.
storyline. Did you have to do any like research into what makeup artists do? Because at one point, you talk about she's using makeup to make up John, and there's a palette of colors for bruises. And I think I never
Yeah.
realized you had things like that.
Yeah. I didn't realize it either until I looked it up, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's funny because I've had that question before about research, and I guess it was so part of the process that I forget that, yeah, I did do research because, you would write and then you would Google, what does this look like? Or I remember emailing the makeup artist and asking her questions. And so yeah, I mean, so that inspiration really first came from me watching The Chosen. That's kind of become really popular. And this has always been me as well. Like on the Blu-rays or the DVDs that would come out, VHS tapes. Like if there were like the behind the scene features, like I felt cheated if the movie that I just purchased did not have that because I wanted to see some of the inner workings. I love that. And so The Chosen was showing a lot of that, the inner workings. You're seeing cast and crew talking and even people coming on. And it just began to start this idea of what kind of relationship develops between these industry professionals, especially makeup artists and stylists and hairstylists, because you're seeing that actor in their most vulnerable state, like maybe early hours, and then they're in the chair for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. And I'm thinking, like, what? I mean, what do you talk about, right? What happens? And so it may not always be good if that person's maybe a jerk, but I thought, surely, I know for sure, relationships start from there. And friendships start from there as well. And so I began to think about that aspect too. So what would happen with these two professionals who don't necessarily like each other, at least one doesn't like the other? How do you work that out when like she's in his face the whole time? And I've been glad to read some of the early reviews coming in where some have said, we work in the industry or we've been a makeup artist. And, first I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh God. And they're like, this is one of the most accurate portrayals of maybe film set life, that industry. And so that's really encouraging. And it's not like, because the majority is that the small town aspect, but I'm thankful that the parts that are in there feel very accurate to those who work in those industries. So that's really encouraging for me as author.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really fascinating. It adds extra level layer of texture to the book. I don't want to say too much to spoil it for other readers, but you do manage to bring in a little bit of Iceland into the book, and I
I
thought
do.
that must
I
have been
do. It's like a
I
little
really
Easter egg. And
was
yeah.
thinking,
I'm sorry, say it again.
I was thinking you had to be doing that intentionally. That's not just
Not just random, but it's grounded in reality, that part that's in there,
Mhm.
because of what you see in your stores all the time and all that. But yeah, I thought, it's, you love like, the movies, and especially like the Marvel movies where you look back, oh, that was an Easter egg that was pointing to this thing. And so I just thought it'd be fun to do a little bit of that in the
Yeah,
book.
that was very cute. Let's talk a little bit about your writing process because you had written nonfiction, other kinds of
Hmm.
writing. Now you're writing a novel. Did some of the skills you learned, like writing grants or other things, were they transferable? Was it a whole new, did you have to recreate the wheel when it came time to write her part to play? What was that process like from the
Yeah, I
writers?
think, yeah, I think a lot of it, I think it came into play into different pieces of it. I think the poetry and my past songwriting, and I usually write pretty lyrical, even with my nonfiction. So I call it kind of more creative nonfiction. But that came into play with some of those aspects, the scenes, the setting, but
Mhm.
also I think, coming from, being a speaker and in ministry, even the encouragement and the words people are saying. So that came into play there. But even like the grant writing aspect, that came into play with even the proposal. And so even that proposal process was not as intimidating for me because I had worked on before just all the different content and the components that you need to include in grant writing that bring it into that proposal part. And so that was actually very, very helpful for me to have that framework already. But there's also levels of showing, not telling. And even in this book, I can look back and say, okay, like, ooh, I need to get better at and showing and not telling. And so some of that writing craft for sure was not necessarily brand new, but I had to like really sharpen it, and still needs to be sharpened. And every author would say they're still growing in that. And so yeah, some of that definitely came in. But and I think this is why too I really wanted to go the traditional route for fiction. Not, and well, yes, because I want to see the book maybe wider in different places, but I almost wanted the gatekeeper aspect to help sharpen me. Does that make sense? So like, just even like
Yes.
my agent initially, when she said this book's not marketable, to a year later I've now submitted her a marketable fiction book because I took the time to learn, to get better and to craft, to kind of read more, to pay attention as I read. And so just all of that, like I really was intentional about it taking time because I wanted it to be, I guess, good enough based on these professionals so that if it wasn't, then I can sharpen and work on that area.
No, actually, I think that's very admirable. I think the one diminishing return to indie publishing is that there isn't more checks on quality
Hmm.
work. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
there's some wonderful indie published books out there. There's authors that really know what they're doing, but sometimes it's almost too easy, yeah, to just
yeah.
write something and get it put up without someone saying, maybe you need to rethink that character or this isn't working.
Yes.
That.
Yes, because I'm so glad for my editor who was like, "Hey, listen, I love this character, but this other character, I don't know about." So, and you need those things. They're just like, "Hey, what day is it actually?" Like you have a repeat. I mean, all of that is was just so beneficial, such a learning process. So yes, I'm definitely thankful for the length of time because it's making me a better writer.
When it came time to write a novel, you had many choices. Why romance? Why did you choose to write in
Ooh.
the romance genre?
I love a good love story. I really do. And I mean, and I do, I love, I mean, history though, too. I love the historical fiction and there's that sense of escapism and there's just so much there. But you know, growing up with like, I say growing up because I didn't watch them as a child, but as I got older, like the rom-coms
Yeah.
and like the 90s and 2000s, you know, for me, and I think everybody has the era of like when they would watch movies, but just those sweet movies like The Wedding Planner. I loved Made in Manhattan, Love and Basketball, even the Pride and Prejudice, those aspects. I just there's just something about the newness of love and just all the things that maybe would be meaningless in another situation, but because now you have that filter of attraction that like I laughed with somebody else on an interview about Pride and Prejudice after you know Darcy places Elizabeth into the carriage and walks back and that hand flex. And so all of us are just like, did you see his hand flex? It's so simple. It's so foolish, really, right? But because of the filter of the attraction and all of that. And so it makes just moments to me really significant, meaningful, little bitty things, little touches, and like, and so it just adds a layer to the story that is just so fun and gives you something to root for. Of course, you're rooting for that interchange in the characters, you're rooting for the outward things that are happening that they need to get fixed, but when you're seeing two people kind of come together, you begin to root for that as well. And romance too, for me, is not even just say between that relationship, that wooing type, because something like my husband told me like before when we started dating, like he's like, you know, what the work that I do in the community has a sense of romance to it, as in it feels like this is great, it's a good thing that we're doing. And so I think a romantic feel can come with even maybe your job, your role, where it feels like there's a this rosy glow over it. And so I just kind of I love that too, of just that wonder, the joy, the newness, freshness that kind of comes into play with romance or with this maybe this call or a purpose that we have that draws us.
Oh, that's beautifully said. Um, what kind of a reader is Jenny? You've talked about your love of romance. Do you read across the border? Are there certain authors or books that have been important to you over the course of your reading life?
Yeah, I definitely, when I was younger, read across the board for sure. I mean, Babysitter's Club, Sweet Valley High, then Nancy Drew, and then, you know, Goosebumps for a little bit, the horror, but I had to stop that. I was like, I enjoy my sleep, so I'm going to stop the horror books, or Fear Street and all those things. But now I think I'm still varied. I love, you know, I don't read fantasy. The probably the only fantasy like I read or have read is probably Lord of the Rings and you know, and Narnia. Maybe if I had, I may jump into another one, but I definitely read, yeah, the historical fiction, historical romance, contemporary, and then contemporary romance, women's fiction. I love, yeah, reading those type of books. And important to me, I think as a teenager, like Francine Rivers was, I
Yeah.
mean, I was enthralled because I didn't really know that, say, faith-based fiction was even a thing. And so to read her books in the Mark of the Line series and just get immersed in that, you know, that first century Roman time. I mean, it was just incredible, absolutely incredible. So I love those books and then continued on with other authors. And so it's the same probably with and I love action as well and suspense as well. So because for me, watching the movies, I'll watch the rom-coms, I'll watch the British historicals, and then like I'll be there even more than my husband watching the Marvel movie, So to a certain extent, the new ones I'm like, nah, not so
Yeah.
much, but after the end game, I was like, I don't know as much, but if you don't have Robert Downey, like what do we have? You know what I mean? It's just like it's just not as fun. So anyway, yeah.
You're right about Francine Rivers. I mean, she was one of the first authors to show you could have flawed characters in inspirational
Yes.
fiction, and that was
Yes.
okay. They didn't have to all be
Yes.
perfect.
No,
So,
no. And it could be raw and gritty
yeah.
and just on the edge, actually. And I know some have issue with even like redeeming love and all of that because of the rawness and grittiness of it. But I think that's the point of inspirational fiction, that it leads to hope. That's the key. Some are more, subtle with the faith thread, some are more, obvious and out there, but ultimately all of it, our hope is that it will lead to hope for people.
It's true. Now you can say as much as you like or as little as you like about the next question, but what's next for you as a writer? What can we
Uh,
expect?
What's What's next for me is hopefully getting to continue in Hope Springs and to write stories about Adonai's cousins.
Okay.
And so that's the hope. So hoping, if this book does well, I'm hoping there's opportunity to write more about them. But so I love my main characters, but I definitely adore as well the people in the community and her cousins, and they're so fun. And even other reviewers have said the same thing. They would love to read stories about them. So that's what I'm working on right now. And so hopefully it will come all unfold where that will be the next book on the shelf next year.
That's great. You're in Iceland. Is there any
Mhm.
opportunities for you as an author there to like do book signings, or what is the book climate like
Oh,
there?
that's a good question. Actually, Iceland apparently has more authors per capita than I think any other country, and because our population is like 380,000, and so there's definitely people love to read lots of books. Now, the majority in Icelandic, of course, but even Christmas time, you'll see the grocery stores, tons of different places lined with tables with books because people usually give books as presents, and we'll read them around the holidays. But the book signing part, I would probably have to. That's would be something that I would have to initiate. Maybe in my circle of people um, because it's such a smaller population too, and like the amount of maybe people who would want to read this book in English, it wouldn't be as much. That's the hard part, being in Iceland. But yeah, but there's opportunities to share, and thankfully even some of my past books helped open the door to my husband and I getting to have a radio program on the radio station, an English language radio program, and other people have read and really enjoyed it. And now I'm working on getting one of my other nonfictions translated to Icelandic. So yeah, there's not really the opportunities to maybe like market it here as much. I guess it's old school, like person to person,
Just,
people, yeah,
word of
yeah,
mouth.
talking about it, word of mouth, yeah.
Um, in addition to all of your writing, you're also involved in another project called Milk and Honey Women. Can you
Hmm.
tell us anything about that, or would you like to tell us?
Yeah, yeah, that is. I've always struggled like growing up with identity, kind of like who am I? Because that we talked about this earlier about putting so much on your shoulders that you define yourself by what you do instead of who you are. And that was kind of the focus of my first book. But my second book, and after I kind of got out of like a slump, if you will, that whole thing about permission, that was kind of really the besides the fiction, what I jumped into as well about encouraging, because I had gone from working full time and just running around doing so much. Now I'm in Iceland trying to learn a new language, have an infant, yeah, just so much going on. And then you think, do I still have meaning and purpose in this type of role? And there's a story in the Bible in Judges chapter 4 and 5 about two women and this battle going on. And one of them is Deborah. She's this outspoken, woman who's leading Israel basically. And she's the one who's saying like, hey, we need to go fight. And she's out there on the battlefield. Another woman named Jael who's at her home doing her normal things, but together the two of them help bring victory to this battle because Deborah's leading the army. And then Jael ends up being at the house when the general comes to her house asking to be hid. She hides him. She gives him warm milk. He asks for water. She gives him milk. And then she drives a tent peg through his head, which is very gruesome and graphic. But the cool part about that story is that you see these two women, one, you can say like an outside working mom, outside working woman, and then the other, an inside, at home woman, both working together in a battle to see victory happen. And the cool thing that I found, and this is where the milk and honey comes in, is that Deborah's name means honeybee, JL's name means mountain goat. So you have in the story this woman whose name means, bee, you produce honey, and this other one, goat, you produce milk. And the Lord would say, throughout the scripture that I'm leading you into a land flowing with milk and honey. And so for me, I was like, oh my goodness, like that milk and honey comes together in the story of these two women. Like, and it's just incredible. And so for me, that really like encouraged me, like in the season that I was in. And then stirred that passion for me to encourage others that, like, do you know who you are? It's not about what you do, it's about who you are. And once you know who you are, out of the overflow of that, you can bring amazing influence where you are. That you may be the Deborah who's out there out front on the battlefield. You may be the woman who's in your house doing your normal everyday thing, but your normal everyday thing is significant because you never know how that will be used. And so but together we can do so much. And so that really spurs me on. And so I love encouraging women in that, because we tend to compare, we tend to compete, to look at each other, we're looking at each other's highlights, compared to our, like, background behind the scenes stuff. But all of it matters, all of it's significant. And so that's for me. So that's what that is. So it's not really a community, it is a book that I wrote, but it's kind of, I'll do lives and I'll just encourage, call them milk and honey moments. And I'll encourage women in that, of just those, maybe let's look past the surface and let's see how what you're doing even right now really matters and is really significant and is where you're supposed to be. And so that's kind of what I do with that. But I just love that story and just seeing just this play out in these two different women.
Yeah, that's terrific. I can't believe we're almost out of time. Can you let those listening in know, are there ways they can find out more about you and your books? Are you on social media?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely on social media. I'm Jenny Erlingsson on Instagram and Jenny Ayenda Erlingsson on Facebook. But you can go to my website, jennyerlingsson.com, and find out more information. And especially with her part to play, I have a page dedicated to the book. And so you can kind of see some, playlists and what the characters look like. And actually, if you will join my email list, and so authors, that's really big for us, join the email list. But coming out around the same time the book does, I do a quarterly Milk and Honey Women magazine, and I have interviewed 4 makeup artists in the industry. And so they're going to share their own journeys, what clients they work with, and kind of certain things about what they do, which is really, really fun to get
Oh,
an inside look at what they do with, Adane being that makeup artist as well.
it's like a behind the scenes for your book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's going to be fun.
Well, that's terrific. I want to thank Jenny for taking time to be with us today virtually and talk about her book and her projects. And thank you for tuning in virtually to another author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you.